Hey ECC kids, this is Laura. I'm so glad that you could be with us tonight. I wish we could be in person, but I'm really happy that we have this time together, even if we can't be in the same room. We are in a really important week right now called Holy Week. Some of you older kids, you know what that means. Younger kids, Holy Week is a term that we use to describe a really important week in Jesus' life, leading up to Easter Sunday. And friends, we are really getting excited to celebrate Easter Sunday. But before we get there, we have to talk about some really important things that happened in the life of Jesus before that day, before the celebration. Some of those times were really dark. Some of them were scary. Some of them, you younger kids, you might have questions about why or how or some of the sad things that Jesus felt or the things that happened to him. Friends, that's what we are here for. Parents, as you're watching with your kids, know that you can talk about this at any time. Pause the video. Kids, ask questions of your mom or dad if you're not sure, if you don't understand, or if you're watching with grandma or grandpa. That's okay. That's what this is about. So we want to take some time here and just share with you the stories leading up to the celebration of Easter. We're going to read those from the Jesus Storybook Bible. Some of you might have this at home. If you do, you can even pause this video, go home or go into your room or wherever it is and get it. And you can open up. The first one we're going to do is on page 286. It's called The Servant King. So feel free to just pause and go get that. You can, that way you can look at the pictures while I read it to you. And we're going to read through a couple of these stories together. The first one, like I said, is called The Servant King. And I'm going to read this just like I would if you were in my classroom. If you have this Jesus Storybook Bible at home, go ahead and read along with. Okay, so this is an account from the Last Supper from Mark 14 and from John 13 through 14. It was Passover, the time when God's people remembered how God had rescued them from being slaves in Egypt. Every year they killed a lamb and they ate it. The lamb died instead of us, they would say. But this Passover, God was getting ready for an even greater rescue. Jesus and his friends were having the Passover meal together upstairs in a room. But Jesus' friends were arguing. What about? They were arguing, get ready for this, about stinky feet. Yes, that's right, stinky feet. It's okay to laugh. It's true. It's in the Bible. I mean, maybe that phrase isn't, but that's what they were talking about. Now, the thing about the feet back then was that people didn't wear shoes like we wear shoes, the same shoes that we wear now. They wore sandals. And that might not sound unusual, except the streets in those days were dirty. And I mean really dirty. They were stinky dirty, and there were cows and horses everywhere. And you can imagine all the stuff on the street left over from those cows and horses that ended up in their sandals and in their feet. So anyway, someone had to wash away the dirt, but it was a dreadful job. Who on earth would ever dream of volunteering to do that? Only the lowliest servant. I'm not the servant, Peter said. Nor am I, said Matthew. Quietly, Jesus got up from the table. He took off his robe. He picked up a basin of water, he knelt down, and he started to wash his friend's feet. You can't, Peter said. He didn't understand about Jesus being the servant king. If you don't let me wash away the dirt, Peter, Jesus said, then you can't be close to me. Jesus knew that what people needed most was to be clean on the inside. All of the dirt on their feet was nothing compared to the sin that was inside their hearts. Then wash me, Lord, Peter said, tears filling in his eyes. All of me. One by one, Jesus washed everyone's feet. I am doing this because I love you, Jesus said. Do this for each other. Now, one of Jesus' friends had a plan to make a bad choice. No one else knew what the bad plan was, but Jesus knew. And so did Judas. Judas was going to help the leaders capture Jesus for only 30 pieces of silver. Go on, Judas, Jesus said. And Judas got up from the meal, he left the room, and he walked out into the dark night. Then Jesus picked up some bread and he broke it. He gave it to his friends. He picked up a cup of wine and he thanked God for it. And he poured it out and he shared it. My body is like this bread. It will break, Jesus told them. This cup of wine is like my blood. It will pour out. But this is how God will rescue the whole world. My life will break and God's broken world will mend. Just as the Passover lamb died, so now I will die instead of you. My blood will wash away all of your sins, and you'll be clean on the inside in your hearts. So whenever you eat or drink, remember, Jesus said, that I have rescued you. Jesus knew it was nearly time for him to leave the world and to go back to be with God. I won't be with you long, he said. You are going to be very sad, but God's helper will come, and he won't ever leave. So don't be afraid. You are my friends, and I love you. Then they sang their favorite song, and they walked up to their favorite place, an olive garden. Friends, we're going to stop reading here. We're going to pick up in a little bit. This is where we invite you as families to do something really special together. Miss Kim had sent out an email, so parents, hopefully you've gathered the supplies already. If you haven't, feel free to go do that now. We're going to invite you as a family to participate in washing each other's feet. And kids, younger kids, that might feel kind of silly. It might even tickle a little bit. That's okay. Older kids, you might feel like, I don't want you to touch my feet. Guess what? That's kind of the point, right? Our feet are dirty, icky, smelly, and maybe not in the same way that Jesus' friends' feet were, but all the same, usually other people don't touch our feet and much less clean them. And also not because they want to. So families, we're going to give you an opportunity to participate in this foot washing exercise and do it for each other. And kids, you can even wash your mom or dad's feet and you can talk about how that made you feel. And if some of it's funny, that's okay too. But there's a part of it that, especially some of you who are older, that feels a little bit, here's a big word for you, it might feel a little bit humiliating. That's part of what Jesus' friends experienced. So families talk about that. And then also we provided some links for the communion part. In Big Church, we're going to be participating in communion together. We have some color sheets, some word finds, some different things related to communion. So kids, if you haven't taken your first communion yet, families, if that's not something you've participated with yet as a family, feel free to use some of those other resources so your kids can participate in communion alongside with you. Welcome back, friends. We're going to continue reading about Jesus' journey to the cross in the section from the Jesus Storybook Bible called A Dark Night in the Garden. The wind was picking up now, blowing clouds across the moon, shrouding the garden in darkness. "Stay up with me?" Jesus asked his friends. They said yes, and they waited under the olive trees, but they were tired and soon they fell asleep. Jesus walked ahead alone into the dark. He needed to talk to his heavenly Father. He knew that it was time for him to die. They had planned it long ago, he and his Father. Jesus was going to take the punishment for all the wrong things that anybody had ever done or ever would do. "Papa, Father," Jesus cried, and he fell to the ground. "Is there any other way to get your children back? To heal their hearts, to get rid of the poison?" But Jesus knew there was no other way. All the poison of sin was going to have to go into his own heart. God was going to pour into Jesus' heart all of the sadness and all of the brokenness in people's hearts. He was going to pour into Jesus' body all the sickness in people's bodies. God was going to have to blame his Son for everything that had gone wrong, and it would crush Jesus. But there was something else, something even more horrible. When people ran away from God, they lost God. It was what happened when they ran away. Not being close to God was like a punishment. Jesus was going to have to take that punishment. Jesus knew what it meant. He was going to lose his Father, and that, Jesus knew, was going to break his heart into two. Violent sobs shook Jesus' whole body. Then Jesus was quiet, like a lamb. "I trust you, Papa," he said. "Whatever you say, I will do." Suddenly, through the trees, a glitter of starlight flashed of steel. Into the quiet garden came whispered, muffled voices, clanking metal, and the sound of boots marching. Jesus stood up. He woke his friends. "Now is the time," he said gently. "Everything that was written about me, what God has been telling people all through the long years, it's all coming true." And into the night, with burning torches and lanterns, with swords and clubs and armor they came, an army of soldiers. Judas led them straight to Jesus so that they could arrest him. Jesus was waiting for them. Peter leapt up, took a sword, and tried to defend Jesus. He sliced off a guard's ear. Jesus immediately touched the guard and he healed him. "Peter," he said, "this is not the way." Peter didn't realize that no army, no matter how big, could ever arrest Jesus, not unless Jesus let them. Then Jesus, who had never done anything except love people, was arrested as if he was a criminal. Jesus' friends were afraid, so they ran away and they hid in the dark shadows. The guards marched Jesus off and they took him to the leaders. The leaders put Jesus on trial. "Are you the Son of God?" they asked. "I am," Jesus said. "Who do you think you are to call yourself God? You must die for calling yourself the Son of God." Only the Romans were allowed to kill prisoners, so the leaders made a plan. "We'll tell the Romans, this man wants to be our king, and then they will crucify him." But it would be all right. It was God's plan. "It was for this reason that I was born into the world," Jesus said. We're going to pause there for a minute and give you another opportunity to meet with your families. Friends, that was a really big deal. Jesus was betrayed, and that's a big word again for some of you. Some of you know what betrayed means. Jesus was betrayed by his friends on a couple different levels, and what that means is he was hurt very badly by the ones he loved and trusted. And friends, you're going to have an opportunity here to sit with your families, maybe your brother or your sister, and just to take a moment to pray like Jesus did in the garden. You can ask God hard questions. You can ask him why. You can tell God thank you. You can tell Jesus thank you that he prayed that prayer and he was the one who was betrayed so that you don't have to be. Whatever your heart wants to say to God, you can go ahead and take some time with your family and spend time with God in the garden with your family, just like Jesus did. And remember, Jesus' life was set for us to follow. So when you come to God, you can come just like Jesus did, and you can give him all of your hard feelings, all of your hard questions, and nothing is too big or too small for God to answer or to talk with you about. So go ahead and take some time as a family and just spend some time in prayer together. Okay, welcome back for our final section of Jesus' journey to the cross. We're going to pick up in the Jesus Storybook Bible in the section that's called The Sun Stops Shining. "So you're a king, are you?" the Roman soldiers jeered. "Then you'll need a crown and a robe." They gave Jesus a crown made out of thorns and put a purple robe on him and pretended to bow down to him. "Your Majesty," they said. Then they whipped him and they spat on him. They didn't understand that this was the Prince of Life, the King of heaven and earth, who had come to rescue them. The soldiers made him a sign, "Our King," it said, and they nailed it to a wooden cross. They walked up a hill outside of the city. Jesus carried the cross on his back. Jesus had never done anything wrong, but they were going to kill him in the same way that criminals were killed. They nailed Jesus to the cross. "Father, forgive them," Jesus whispered. "They don't understand what they're doing." "You say you've come to rescue us," people shouted, "but you can't even rescue yourself." But they were wrong. Jesus could have rescued himself. A legion of angels would have flown to his side if he had called. "If you were really the Son of God, you could just climb down off that cross," they said. And of course they were right. Jesus could have just climbed down. Actually, he could have just said one word to make it all stop. Like when he healed that little girl, and when he stilled the storm, and when he fed 5,000 people. But Jesus stayed. You see, they didn't understand. It wasn't the nails that kept Jesus there. It was love. Papa, Jesus cried. Where are you? Don't leave me. And for the first time and the last, when he spoke, nothing happened. Just a horrible, endless silence. God didn't answer. He had turned away from his little boy. Tears rolled down Jesus' face, the face of the one who would wipe every tear from every eye. Even though it was midday, a dreadful darkness covered the face of the world. The sun could not shine. The earth trembled and it quaked. The great mountains shook. Rocks split in two until it seemed that the whole world would break, that creation itself would tear apart. The full force of the storm of God's fierce anger at sin was coming down on his own son instead of his people. It was the only way God could destroy sin and not destroy his children whose hearts were filled with sin. Then Jesus shouted out in a loud voice, "It is finished!" And it was. He had done it. Jesus had rescued the whole world. "Father," Jesus cried, "I give you my life." And with a great sigh, he let himself die. Strange clouds and shadows filled the sky, purple, orange, and black, like a bruise. Jesus' friends gently carried Jesus. They laid Jesus in a new tomb carved out of rock. How could Jesus die? What had gone wrong? What did it mean? They didn't know anything anymore, except they did know that their hearts were breaking. That's the end of Jesus, the leaders said. But just to be sure, they sent strong soldiers to guard the tomb. They hauled a huge stone in front of the door of the tomb so that no one could get in or out. Friends, when Jesus went to the cross, it was a really big deal. And I know a lot of you know that. The time that you get to spend with your family now in an activity is going to look a little bit like this. We would love for you to spend some time, whether it's now or whether it's later, creating your scene on a hill of the three crosses representing the one cross for Jesus and the criminal on either side of him, and spend some time reflecting on what Jesus did for us on that cross and what maybe it felt like to be God in that moment too. Spend some time with your families on the activity. Again, you can spend more time in prayer and just reflecting on this Holy Week, the week leading up to Easter. And friends, I'm excited to meet back up with you and to celebrate with you on Sunday. And for now, we'll just really focus on the good gift of Good Friday that God gave us on the cross.